President Lee Jae-myung on Tuesday addressed the National Assembly so that his record of $508 billion budget for 2026 can be poured into new growth engines, such as artificial intelligence. Defense chiefs of Seoul and Washington held their annual security talks here in Seoul, where the American Defense Secretary promised interagency efforts to help South Korea construct nuclear-powered submarines. And China has extended its visa-free entry policy for South Korean nationals for another year, which is seen as a follow-up to the success of the summit between the two countries' leaders in Gyeongju last week. President Lee Jae-myung addressed the National Assembly this morning for his government's budget proposal for next year. He called for bipartisan support to open up the era of artificial intelligence. Our Yoon Jung-min leads us tonight.
The focus of the 2026 budget proposal was on seeking new growth engines, with President Lee Jae-myung calling it the very first budget to open up the era of AI.
국제 무역 통상 질서의 재편과 인공지능 대전환의 파도 앞에서 국가 생존을 모색해야 할 절체절명의 위기에 처해 있습니다. 이제는 인공지능 시대의 고속도로를 구축해서 도약과 성장의 새로운 미래를 열어야 합니다.
The government has projected a record high of 728 trillion won, or over $508 billion for next year's budget, up 8% from this year. Nearly $7 billion has been earmarked for AI-related projects, 3 times higher than this year's spending, with a focus on physical AI and use of the technology in robots and automobiles. Next year's defense spending will be expanded by more than 8%, worth over $46 billion, with more use of AI by the defense forces, as the commander-in-chief called for self-reliant defense.
전 세계 5위의 군사력으로 평가받는 우리 대한민국이 국방을 외부에 의존한다는 것은 우리 국민의 자존심 문제 아니겠습니까?
Other areas of focus were on the R&D budget, which will be a record high, as well as the so-called National Growth Fund, NK Culture. He also vowed to secure a social safety net and help small business owners through local consumption coupons. And looking back on last week's diplomatic super week, the president said uncertainties over the economy have been eased by reaching a trade deal with the U.S. As the president called for across-the-aisle collaboration, speaking before a 2/3 full Congress, following a boycott by the main opposition People Power Party over an arrest warrant against its party member.
좀 허전하군요.
The mood was starkly contrasting as the ruling Democratic Party lawmakers responded to the president with rounds of applause. The legal deadline for the parliamentary budget review is set for December 2nd. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
So the government has submitted next year's budget proposal, and with the National Assembly beginning its deliberations this week, a fierce debate is expected over the expansionary fiscal stance and the president's key policy programs. For more, we turn to our political correspondent, Moon Hae-ryun. Welcome back, Hae-ryun.
Good evening, Tammy.
So Hae-ryun, we just heard President Lee Jae-myung deliver his speech on the budget proposal. Walk us through the key agenda and the review schedule for now.
That's right. So as you've said, the president revealed the outline of the government's first full-year budget in his policy speech this morning. And with this, Parliament will kick off its budget review. On Wednesday, so tomorrow, the National Assembly's Special Committee on Budget and Accounts will hold a public hearing on the proposal, where experts and committee members debate on the core contents of the budget bill. This will then be followed up by general policy inquiries on Thursday and Friday this week. The committee will then summon officials from various ministries to thoroughly examine the budget bill, and it does this by dividing the ministries into economic and non-economic ministries. So the likes of the Ministry of Economy and Finance would be categorized into the former, while those such as the Ministry of Education will be sorted into the latter. Economic ministries will be reviewed on the 10th and the 11th, and non-economic ministries on the 12th and the 13th. And during this process, the members of the National Assembly will ask questions about major items for increase or reduction, policy priorities, and the feasibility of budget execution. Then, from November 17th, a budget adjustment subcommittee begins the detailed review process, adjusting spending before the deadline of December 2nd.
Right, so Arirang, this is the first budget proposal under the Lee Jae-myung administration. Now, what are the highlights of the proposal? Walk us through them.
Right, so the 728 trillion won budget for 2026, it's aimed at both recovery and growth through bold fiscal spending. It's the largest budget in South Korea's history, and the government says it's focusing on performance-based fiscal management, so cutting inefficient projects while investing heavily in key growth engines. 27 trillion won, just under $19 billion was cut to restructure inefficient projects and administrative costs. And aside from the focus on AI and research and development, as outlined by President Lee in his policy speech, other notable allocations include support for industries affected by U.S. tariffs and direct cash payments for rural residents as part of new pilot programs. With the South Korea-U.S. summit during the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju still fresh in people's minds and the local elections coming up next year, it's no surprise that the budget reflects these priorities. And another big aspect of government spending plans for next year includes social safety nets and housing, which reflect ongoing efforts to address Korea's demographic shifts.
So the budget proposals sound promising as they are planned to go into new growth engines like AI, but the record budget also comes with a great controversy. How are the main opposition and the ruling parties reacting to this?
That's right. So today, the main opposition, People Power Party, actually boycotted President Lee's policy speech this morning at the National Assembly, protesting what it calls political oppression by the government. Wearing black masks and ribbons, reading Mourning for Liberal Democracy, opposition lawmakers staged a silent protest on the steps of the main hall, condemning the recent arrest warrant request for former floor leader Chu Kyung-ho in relation to the failed martial law order last December. The Speaker of the National Assembly, Won-sik, opened the session by welcoming the president's visit, noting that while political discord remains, cooperation is vital.
Since this is a very crucial time, I believe it's especially important for the National Assembly and the government to work closely together and take a step forward in cooperation.
He praised the administration's diplomatic gains at the recent APEC leaders meeting, saying they restored market confidence and national pride. Democratic Party lawmakers applauded repeatedly throughout the president's 22-minute speech, particularly as he highlighted the government's efforts to stabilize the economy and improve citizens' livelihoods.
Well, do keep us posted on this political clash between the ruling and main opposition parties over the next year's budget. Hae-ryun, thank you so much for coming in tonight.
Thank you for having me, Tammy.
South Korea should be able to launch its first nuclear-powered submarine using its own technology in the mid to late 2030s, following the recent agreement with the U.S. on nuclear fuel supplies. That's according to a Defense Ministry official, Won Jong-dae, during Tuesday's cabinet meeting, where he added that Korea may begin construction in the late 2020s if it secures a fuel from the U.S. through consultation. For that, a pan-governmental task force will be set up. During the Korea-U.S. summit last week, President Lee Jae-myung asked his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump to allow Korea to secure nuclear fuel supplies for submarines. Trump later approved that such submarines could be built at a Philadelphia shipyard owned by South Korea's Hanwha Ocean. And President Lee Jae-myung told the U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth that South Korea's plans to regain wartime operational control from Washington within its 5-year term will further strengthen Seoul and Washington's alliance. According to presidential spokesperson Kang Yoo-jung, during their meeting at the Yongsan presidential office today on Tuesday, the president said the move would help ease America's defense burden in the Indo-Pacific region. He also expressed appreciation to U.S. President Donald Trump for supporting South Korea's building of nuclear-powered submarines. Secretary Hegseth responded that Washington will actively support Seoul's efforts to bolster its self-defense capabilities, citing increased defense spending and developing such subs. And Defense Minister An Gyu-baek and his U.S. counterpart Pete Hegseth held their annual security talks on Tuesday. A joint communique was not released, but they did tap into ways to boost defense ties. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has the details.
The South Korean and U.S. defense chiefs reaffirmed the steadfastness of the ROK-U.S. alliance during their annual security talks, the 57th Security Consultative meeting on Tuesday. A joint communique was not released, waiting for a joint fact sheet for the two countries to come out first. Still, Defense Minister An Gyu-baek and U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did share some parts of the discussion they had during the meeting. Regarding the nuclear-powered submarines, which Trump recently gave approval to, the Pentagon vowed support across its departments.
We're going to work closely with the Department of State and the Department of Energy to fulfill President Trump's commitment in a deliberate manner. And I think it's a reflection of something I said, that the President wants allies to be strong.
Noting that South Korea is a model ally, Hegseth said he was encouraged by South Korea's commitment to increase defense spending and make greater investments in ROK military capabilities. To modernize the alliance and boost ties, the two allies agreed on some practical steps, including having U.S. warships be repaired in South Korea to ensure their most lethal capability remains ready to respond to any crisis. As to whether the U.S. forces Korea could be used against China in the Taiwan Strait, U.S. Defense Chief underlined the importance of flexibility, but said the USFK is oriented to protect South Korea from the north.
There's no doubt, flexibility for regional contingencies is something we would take a look at, but we are focused on standing by our allies here and ensuring the threat of the DPRK is not a threat to the Republic of Korea, and certainly continue to extend nuclear deterrence as we have before.
The comment resonates with the two defense chiefs' earlier visit to the joint security area within the demilitarized zone on Monday for the first time in 8 years. Meanwhile, when asked about whether South Korea hopes to pursue nuclear weapons development, Minister An clearly said this was not possible.
South Korea is part of the NPT, so it's not allowed to have nuclear weapons. Therefore, developing nuclear weapons in South Korea would not be possible.
He further added that because South Korea cannot possess nuclear weapons, the combined nuclear and conventional integration system, integrating U.S. nuclear capabilities with South Korea's conventional weapons, has been established. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Though the much-anticipated meeting between the leaders of Pyongyang and Washington did not take place on the sidelines of the APEC leaders meeting last week, signs do indicate that North Korea have been preparing for the possibility. And that is according to South Korea's National Intelligence Service on Monday. On Tuesday, during a National Assembly inspection of the agency, the NIS reportedly stated that there have been indications that Pyongyang has been getting ready for possible talks with the U.S., such as analyzing policy tendencies of working-level officials within the U.S. administration. It also added that if the right conditions are met, the North is likely to seek contact with Washington. In the meantime, the U.S. is pushing to impose new sanctions on ships suspected of violating the UN Security Council resolutions for illegally exporting North Korean coal and iron ore to China. Lee Seung-jae explains more.
The United States has moved to impose new sanctions on 7 ships accused of violating United Nations Security Council resolutions by smuggling North Korean coal and iron ore. According to Reuters, Washington will soon ask the UN North Korea Sanctions Committee to blacklist the vessels, which allegedly transported the banned minerals to China and other destinations. A senior U.S. official said North Korea earns between $200 and $400 million annually through such illegal exports, which are used to fund its nuclear and missile programs. The official also revealed that in May and June, a North Korean vessel named Shinpyeong-6 transferred coal to a Sierra Leone flagged ship called Fly Free on the high seas, later offloading at China's Weifang port. However, to enact the sanctions, all UN Security Council members must agree unanimously. But with China and Russia both having close diplomatic ties to Pyongyang and holding veto powers, the proposal faces steep obstacles. If adopted, the 7 ships could be barred from entering ports worldwide, and related shipping firms or individuals could face asset freezes and travel bans. Analysts say the move underscores Washington's effort to tighten financial pressure on the Kim Jong-un regime amid renewed concerns over North Korea's weapons development and deepening ties with Moscow and Beijing. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In the meantime, China has announced that it will extend its visa-free policy for 45 countries, including South Korea. So people who are visiting tourism for business or tourism can stay up to 30 days until the end of next year. Our An Sung-jin has more.
China has extended its visa-free entry policy for South Korean nationals for another year. This allows a short-term stay of up to 30 days for tourism, business, or family visits until December 31st, 2026. The announcement was made on Monday by China's foreign ministry as part of a plan to make travel more convenient and strengthen international exchanges.
To facilitate cross-border travel between Chinese and foreign nationals, China has decided to extend the visa-free policy for France and several other countries until December 31st, 2026.
The extension applies to 45 countries that were already covered by the temporary visa-free policy, including South Korea, Japan, France, and others. Adding to the list, China will expand the policy to include Sweden starting from November 10th. Analysts say this decision reflects positive momentum in bilateral relations between South Korea and China following the recent summit talks between the country's leaders on the sidelines of the APEC economic leaders meeting in Gyeongju. South Korea has also been implementing its own temporary visa-free policy for Chinese group tourists since last September to encourage reciprocal tourism and improve people-to-people exchanges. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And now here on the local front, while the Bank of Korea held interest rates steady for a third straight month in October, consumer price increases surged to 2.4%. That's the largest rise since July of last year. Ian-jin reports.
South Korea's consumer prices grew at the fastest pace in 15 months in October. According to data released by the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Tuesday, South Korea's consumer prices last month increased 2.4% from a year earlier. This marks the largest on-year increase since July 2024, when they increased by 2.6%. Looking at 2025, on-year consumer price increases have been higher than the Bank of Korea's target of 2% from January to April, then slowed slightly in May to 1.9%, before going back above the 2% mark for June and July. On-year consumer price increases briefly slowed to 1.7% in August, but then climbed over 2% again in September, before hitting a new high for the year in October. The ministry said that October's figures were primarily due to a sharp increase in prices for agricultural and fishery products, which jumped 3.1%, adding 0.25 percentage points to the overall figure. Pork in particular rose 6.1%. And mackerel rose 11%. Processed food and petroleum products also added upward pressure on prices, rising 3.5% and 4.8% respectively. Core inflation, which excludes energy prices and foods that often see short-term price fluctuations, rose 2.2% in October, which is higher than September's 2% increase. Ian-jin, Arirang News.
Now over in the U.S., as the government shutdown there nears its second month, flight delays are piling up due to staffing shortages. The country's transportation secretary says airspace will be closed if it becomes too risky to travel. Cha Young-kyung reports.
Millions of air passengers in the U.S. have been hit by delays or canceled flights due to a spike in staffing shortages amid a lack of pay as the government shutdown enters its second month.
Last night was really bad. It was thousands of people around here all over, all the way outside for really long lines.
We're going to be here probably for about 5 hours now because we thought we had to check in early because of what's going on, so slightly disappointing, but yeah.
Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy says the Trump administration would close all U.S. airspace if it thought an ongoing government shutdown made it too risky to travel. During an interview with CNBC on Monday local time, he said it is not currently at that point. Rather, there are just significant delays. Duffy also added that any absent air traffic controllers are not going to be fired, but issued a plea for them to go to work. As the shutdown has forced 13,000 air traffic controllers and 50,000 Transportation Security Administration officers to work without pay, airlines such as Delta, United, Southwest, and American Airlines all called on Congress to quickly pass a stopgap funding bill, citing aviation safety risks. Scott Kirby, CEO of United Airlines, told Reuters that he's seriously concerned about disruptions to flight bookings and operations with the Thanksgiving holiday at the end of November when travel demand peaks. 차윤경, Arirang News.
Typical autumn temperatures returned in the afternoon. It was fine to take off your warm coat and change into something thinner thanks to milder weather. In the middle of the day, Seoul rose to 16 degrees Celsius, which is very similar to the average temperature at this time of year. However, since there are huge temperature gaps between the morning and daytime, please take good care of your health. As we go into the second half of the week, the daytime temperatures will rise further tomorrow. There will be warm autumn weather in the Seoul at around 19 degrees both tomorrow and Thursday. Seoul and Gyeongju will start at 6 degrees tomorrow morning, with Chuncheon at 3 degrees. Daily highs will rise to 18 to 22 degrees all over the country. On Friday, rain is forecast in the eastern parts of Gangwon-do province and in the south and on Jeju Island over the weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.